Hello Grandmasters, Mike from the WCA, 4 o'clock week 2 video. You are looking at a position that you have seen so many times. It is the 4 knights where white decides to put the bishop on c4, allowing the world famous center fork trick. Now at the 4 p.m. level, I should not have to explain the center fork trick, etc. Even this move, this nice in-between move that white sometimes tries to play, their thinking is, well, if you're giving up a piece for a pawn temporarily, well, I'm going to do the same thing and take on f7. This way, when you recapture, which you should do, and I get my piece back, at least your king can't castle and he's in the middle. But it turns out that this position is not bad at all for black. It's actually considered to be slightly better after the move d5. If white continues with the normal check on g5, do you guys remember where the safest and eventually most active square for the king is? And it turns out it is g8. Now, when you play a move like king g8 and you lock in your rook, that is the complete opposite of the word active. But in the future, you're going to be able to kick that knight with the move h6. You can probably park your king on h7 at some point and then swing the rook toward the center. You can get away with this as black because what did white give up to expose your king? It was the light squared bishop. So as a memory marker, anytime your opponent gives up a light squared bishop or a dark square bishop, it doesn't matter, always pay attention to the color of that bishop, because you can very often put your king on one of the squares that's the same color the bishop was controlling, and you might be safer than you normally were or would be. Okay, so that was what we looked at in the game, actually, continuation, where white sacrificed a piece on f7. And it turns out that some of you guys, one of you anyway, found the idea of putting the king on g8. Okay, I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Now, let's take a look at the game that we covered and do some advanced work. Okay, here we go. All right, so e4, e5. Let me flip the board because we were looking at it from white's perspective. Knight c3, the name of the variation, the Vienna game. Okay, the Vienna game. You are going to hear the Vienna variation coming from some queen pawn openings, but when you hear the word game thrown in there, the Vienna game, it means knight c3 on move 2. We mentioned in class that it's not as popular as knight f3 simply because it doesn't put pressure on this pawn in the middle of the board. Black has a number of options here. The game continuation went knight f6, bishop to c4. Now, funny, when you look at the center fork trick with the bishop on c4, can black get away with taking this pawn? When you take back, simply have the center fork trick. Well, you do and you don't. You need to pay very close attention to the difference here. In your mind, in your memory, if you realize you're black here and go, hey, I can play the center fork trick, keep in mind that there is a difference. Can you spot the main difference here than from the position that I first showed you? And I don't want to put it on the board. I want you guys to actually see this in your head. This is not a 4 knights position. So if you put the 4 knights on the board here in your mind, you'll see that with this knight on f3, there is a diagonal that is blocked. And there is a line here, if you go for the center fork trick, where white can simply play queen h5. And that's an annoying move. And this has been looked at a number of times by players who play these king pawn openings. What I hope is WA students, WCA, how could I forget the C? What would it be without the C? It would be the Westchester Academy. We could be doing anything. How could I forget one of the C? Unbelievable. Anyway, queen h5, be careful. There are some problems here. I'm threatening to mate you on f7, and your e-pawn is hanging. So you can see, now you can get out of this. You know, you can for example, back your knight up, which stops the queen from taking on f7 and stopping here. But then, white starts to get a little initiative after d4. It's not huge, but it's just enough to make you uncomfortable. You see the highlight. When I play d4, your knight's hanging now. It's attacked twice. Knight e6 keeps everything under control, but when white gets the pawn back, this kind of position is very easy to play for white, especially in fast time controls. Remember again what we're trying to build this term, our own set of memory markers. If you could visualize this position in your head, then it doesn't matter what move order it came from. You should go for this position and not burn too much time in your clock. I'm going to put the highlights on. Don't run. Ben is going to run away. He's terrified of frogs. And when he sees this green, it reminds him of forget it. I don't want to go into it. But look at the markers. The knight is going to develop to its most natural square. The dark squared bishop has every option in the world. The king, after one move with the knight, one move with the bishop, will have the option to castle on opposite sides of the board. And the pawn that's advanced to e5 is controlling squares deep in enemy territory. You really shouldn't have to think too much to get to this position. It has to be okay for you to play, okay? I'm really trying to save you guys some time, and then when you do get a concrete variation, hopefully the exercises that you do, you're calculating, will come through, okay? So, again, let's go back to the game. After the move bishop c4, there is the possibility of a center fork trick. Hopefully you guys are getting strong enough to recognize the difference. So black doesn't go in for that, plays knight to c6, and now if white plays knight f3, we have morphed into a center fork trick via the four knights game. It didn't start as a four knights game, but it could turn into one. Okay, hopefully you guys are still with me. Now, d3 here is what white played, bishop to c5, and then white takes advantage of the Vienna move order and plays the move f4. So what they're doing by playing f4, they're kind of turning this into a king's gambit declined position, or just in your mind a king's gambit position. And what is the king's gambit? It's simply when you have the move e4, e5, and white plays f4 on move 2. Now, the risk of playing that way, we've talked about in class. Here, however, after f4, you'll see that there are a lot of variations that black could have played in the king's gambit that are not available. So what is white doing? They're kind of delaying it. And it turns out, from this move order, these players got into a main line. Knight f3, bishop to g4, and now the concept or the move knight a4. And that is basically, give me the bishop pair. I want your dark squared bishop. You really can't save it. We discussed this in class. It is on a beautiful diagonal, but unfortunately, wherever you try to move it, white can chase it back with the pawns and eventually give you an opportunity to trade with this knight. And clearly, if you're white, you're not going to put a knight on a4 unless you can trade for that bishop. Unless there's some tactic I don't see. Otherwise, your knight on a4 is completely out of the game. Okay. One way for black to play here is to voluntarily give up the light squared bishop. And I use the word voluntarily because normally white is going to play a move like h3 or something to provoke this bishop into taking the knight. When you get a master who takes it on their own, they normally have a follow-up. So the follow-up after queen takes f3 was the move knight d4. And by the way, I think it was Fred pointed out you should consider taking with your g-pawn in these positions, always, especially if black has castled on the king side. In your own mind, if you think you're getting enough play by taking with the g-pawn, do it. Even if it turns out to be the wrong plan, the experience that you'll gain using your own ideas in tournament games is much more valuable than anything that I could teach you. If it comes through you, you're going to gain so much more from it. So if you think g takes is the best move during the match, play it. and then analyze after, okay? All right, so in the game, the queen took, and then the queen gets hit with this tempo. Keeping in mind, there are two main moves here. The move in the game we looked at was queen g3, which is a risky move to play because of this idea of knight takes c2, and white has to be willing to shed a little bit of material here. The main line is the queen back to d1. However, black can still keep things interesting by playing b5, and it's here that we turn the game into bishop takes f7, the line that you guys had to play. Now I'm going to turn the board around. It looks totally different from this perspective, but this is what black experienced in the line that you guys played. King took, knight took, and then when white makes these trades, keep in mind they're down a piece for a pawn. They get a pawn back here on e5. The knight went to d7, c3, knight back to e6. And when we played from this position, now remember we made a mistake, or I made a mistake earlier. We had a bishop here from the analysis, but that really didn't come into play. Fortunately, we were able to catch it fast enough. But keep in mind here that when you guys were playing from this position, a lot of you got in trouble with the king. After castle check, most of you put the king on e7. You fought your way out of it, but does the memory marker from earlier in this video come to mind? How about the move king g8? Where's white's light squared bishop? It's not there. This is playable for black. And their future plan will be to put the pawn on h6, tuck the king in, start to fight for the f-file with the rooks, and have a playable game. White is going to try to take advantage of these extra pawns in the center. Okay? Now, let's go back to the game continuation where white chose the move queen g3. So let me reflip the board. Doesn't it look totally different? It really does when you flip the board like that. When white plays queen to g3, they're telling black, I'm inviting you to go for this trade. Take on c2, check. Another memory marker. I'm going to put up positions in the blog from the video. Hopefully you guys will be able to glue those things in your head. The really ambitious students can actually print them out and start your own notebook, but I'll save that for another term. Anyway, where does the king go in these types of positions? And I think it was Andrew F. who pointed out king d1, and the reason being, after you take the rook in the corner, the king is well placed to stop the knight from coming out for free. Okay, so white gives up the rook to play queen takes g7, threatening the rook at the top of the corner. I had this position on my own chessboard, and I pointed this out to you because I used to play the Vienna for a while, and I had analyzed this without a computer, and I came up with the move. I was so proud of myself at the time, queen d7, which makes the position fairly equal. And I found it for black because the double rook sacrifice for white is completely losing. You take the rook in the corner, the king just remarkably comes to e7 and tells the queen, take a second rook. If you study the classics in chess, if you go back into the late 1800s, early 1900s, you're going to see a lot of games. There was a period in chess where the players were really into sacrificing and not having a regard for material, really pushing the initiative. You know, the King's Gambit, for example, was really popular because it created a lot of sharp games. So it wasn't uncommon to see double rook sacrifices. By taking the second rook, white is actually completely lost here. It wouldn't be a bad exercise for you to put this on the board at home and play it out. It's black to play and win in all variations. White is completely crushed here. So see if you guys can work this out. Okay, so after queen takes g7, Oh, and by the way, I told you also, I was so proud of myself for finding this without a computer, but I had spoken to Grandmaster Shabalov at a tournament in Curacao, and he kind of knew all this stuff off the top of his head because he used to play the Vienna too. So my dreams were sunk in one conversation. Okay, so back to the game. Black says, nope, I'm just going to hide my rook in the corner, and white takes the bishop on c5. Pawn takes back. Pawn took in the center, hitting the knight, and the knight played a really cool idea. Takes on e4, taking advantage of the pin here. If you look at the material, however, I see two black rooks at the top of the board for black. I only see one for white. I see two minor pieces for black, two for white. So there's a rook missing somewhere, but black is the one that's struggling here. I believe Fred found the move bishop to h6. When you start getting used to these kinds of positions, you will instantly recall the games that got you here. You are not going to remember the whole game. Some of you will. Listen, I shouldn't say that because there are kids who eventually make master from the WCA. The kids who are that into chess may actually remember the exact position from games. But you guys, until you become that master, they should at least ring a bell where you say to yourself, I'm down a rook, but I definitely have compensation. Your dark squared attack here is very, very powerful. Black just continued to go for material, and after king e2, one of my favorite positions after knight takes h1 was the one you're looking at here, where the two black knights have replaced the two white rooks, and it's black who's in big trouble. There's a forced win here. You just take the rook with check. King went to d7, and queen takes f7, and black is in really, really big trouble. He's not going to live too long if he comes out this way. You can work that out for yourself. If he comes to c6, and then in the game, black went to c8, trying to hide in there, and there are a couple of ways to play. Fred looked at e6, which does still win for white, but it gave black a couple of checks, and if you're not careful, you could walk into something. But it still wins. But white found the move bishop to g5. It's just absolutely crushing. So I will put this position as a memory marker for you. White to play and win. And you find the move bishop to g5. Just basically deflecting the queen. She can't move off that line because any queen check up here is going to mate black, as we did in class, but I want you to do it again. Okay? All right, my friends. I hope you're doing a lot of work on your chess. I'll see you in class.